We all have our own version of the Great Lakes. A cottage week in Michigan. Ore boats on the horizon. Cold, clean water your kids can stand in up to their knees. None of it's a lie. And that's the problem. Because on a beach outside Port Clinton, Ohio, live artillery shells still wash up, and people have been killed picking them up. Then there's a coastline that's drowned over 1,400 people since 2010, on days that looked calm. And there's a morning when 500,000 people were told, all at once, to stop drinking from their taps. 25 deeply disturbing things the Great Lakes are hiding, counting down to the one that makes every other one permanent. 25. Tons of lead in the water supply. Off North Chicago, Illinois, a stretch of Lake Michigan, roughly 2,975 acres, serves as the impact zone for a federal firearms range. The Navy and Marines had been shooting there since 1918. The FBI leased the range in 1976 and bought it outright in 1987. Attorney Stephen Pollack of the Blue Eco Legal Counsel spent years documenting what fell into that water. Through Freedom of Information Act records, he documented that the FBI was training with lead ammunition and using 2,975 acres of Lake Michigan as its impact area, with bullets and shotgun pellets dropping straight into the water. In 2006, the U.S. Coast Guard ran live fire exercises from boats on Lake Michigan, and those bullets landed in the water too. Blue Eco's filings claimed lake lead levels running about 3 times what's considered safe. Pollack and Blue Eco asked for roughly $35 million to dredge corroding rounds out of nearly 3,000 acres of lake bed. And medical reviews of firing ranges show this isn't abstract. Lead from ammunition raises blood lead to levels tied to neurological, cardiovascular, and developmental harm. Lead doesn't sit inert on a lake bottom. It slowly corrodes, shedding dissolved metal and fine particles into sediment, algae, and fish. Whatever happens at the range now, thousands of pounds of legacy ammunition already embedded off North Chicago remain a source of contamination in the exact water the city still drinks, and that slow leaching continues year after year. 24. A month of contaminated water in a single meal. For families who fish the Great Lakes, dinner now comes with a hidden dose. Environmental Working Group scientist David Andrews and colleagues analyzed more than 500 freshwater fish samples collected by federal monitoring programs and found a median total PFAS level of about 11,800 parts per trillion in Great Lakes fish, with one largemouth bass from the Detroit River measured at roughly 64,200. Then they ran the equivalence that makes it real. Eating a single serving of freshwater fish at median PFOS levels can match drinking a whole month's worth of water contaminated at 48 parts per trillion of PFOS. To put that in scale, the EPA's interim health advisory for PFOS in drinking water at the time was 0.02 parts per trillion. So a single fish meal delivered the equivalent of a month of water at 2,400 times that level. The EPA has since replaced that advisory with an enforceable limit of 4 parts per trillion, a number no tap in the country is allowed to exceed, and one a single fish dinner clears without anyone noticing. None of it changes the taste or the smell. It looks and cooks exactly like clean protein. The reason this doesn't fade is chemistry. PFAS compounds don't readily break down, so they keep cycling through the water, the sediment, and the food web, holding fish levels high. Andrews' analysis shows even one serving a year can measurably raise PFOS in a person's blood. So the communities that lean hardest on subsistence fishing and the children whose bodies are still developing face elevated exposure with every fish fry. A dose regulators would never accept from the kitchen faucet, absorbed one dinner at a time. 23. Family beaches closed by what's in the water. That swim at your own risk sign at a Great Lakes beach hides a bigger number than most families realize. Across the May through September 2024 season, at least 256 Great Lakes beaches spanning Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Minnesota, and Wisconsin were closed or posted for contamination, losing a combined 2,988 swimming days. The driver is fecal contamination, E. coli from combined sewer overflows, leaking septic systems, livestock manure, and flocks of geese. flushed into the nearshore whenever it rains hard. Some spots lose the whole season. Lakeview Beach in Lorain County, Ohio, on Lake Erie, was closed or posted for 73 days. And one Wisconsin tally recorded 516 E. coli exceedances in a single year, with 77% of coastal beaches testing potentially unsafe at least once. And the cruelest part is the lag. Microbiologist Tom Edge, who co-chairs a binational Great Lakes beach project, notes that lab methods take about 24 hours. So a closure notice often only confirms that the water you were swimming in yesterday was bad, after the kids have already been in it. Even a green flag isn't the reassurance it seems. Water that passes an E. coli test can still carry other pathogens, chemicals, and algal toxins the monitoring doesn't check for. Climate-driven downpours keep overwhelming aging sewers and washing manure and runoff into the lakes. So these bacteria spikes recur every summer, turning what families read as an isolated bad weekend into a rolling, season-long health risk on the same beaches, year after year. 22. High-level nuclear waste on the beach. The reactors that ring the Great Lakes were never meant to become permanent nuclear dumps. They have anyway. With no licensed permanent repository anywhere in the United States, spent fuel just stays where it was made, sealed in dry casks along the shoreline. Mapping by the group Freshwater Future in 2024 shows Michigan's reactor cask pads sitting only 350 to 2,500 feet from the water, tucked behind low dunes and berms that were never engineered as long-term flood barriers. At the Palisades plant near South Haven, Michigan, the first cask pad went in back in 1993. A 3-foot concrete slab poured 150 yards from Lake Michigan on top of 55 feet of loose sand, anchored to nothing. Beyond Nuclear's radioactive waste specialist Kevin Camps puts it plainly, it's floating on a sand dune. Palisades now holds roughly 49 loaded casks, each of them over 100 tons, on a shoreline of shifting dunes where erosion has already dragged nearby structures into the lake. And this storage isn't as temporary as the word interim suggests. NRC rules let spent fuel stay in these casks for at least 60 years beyond a reactor's licensed life. And the agency's own environmental analysis runs a scenario where they sit there another 100 years on top of that. 160 years past the reactor's licensed life. That quietly binds people not yet born to shoreline storage of material that stays hazardous for tens of thousands of years. The casks remain loaded on eroding dunes and low bluffs as lake levels swing several feet and storms intensify. So the threat is live and forward-looking. A pad failure or an erosion-driven collapse is one bad storm away from putting long-lived radionuclides into the drinking water of 40 million people. 21. The fish that held 915 plastic pieces. When scientists at the University of Toronto's Rochman Lab dissected 212 nearshore fish from Lake Ontario, researcher Keenan Munno found human-made microparticles in the gut of every single one. 12,442 particles in that lake alone, with hundreds more fish from the Humber River and Lake Superior telling the same story. Lake Ontario fish averaged 59 pieces each, but one brown bullhead, pulled from Hamilton Harbor in 2015, held 915 particles, a mix of microplastics, flame retardant bearing synthetics, and dyed fibers, and it stands as the highest load ever documented in a bony fish. Polyethylene, PET, and polypropylene dominated the plastics they could identify, and the contamination doesn't stop at the gut. A 2024 study of recreationally caught fish from Humber Bay found anthropogenic particles in the fillets and guts of every species examined, averaging 138 per fish, with one specimen holding 1,508. And the fillets alone, the part people actually eat, averaged 56 particles, enough that someone eating 2 servings a week would swallow an estimated 12,800 particles a year. Lab director Dr. Chelsea Rochman's team found particles in almost every fillet it tested, all but 3 of the samples in that study. The inputs never let up. Wastewater, laundry effluent, tire dust, and shoreline litter keep loading the lakes, and treatment plants can't capture the smallest particles. Those plastics don't break down. They still cycle through the water, the sediment, and the food web, carrying sorbed pollutants and additives with them. So the burden inside the fish people catch and eat shows no sign of clearing, and every new fillet on a Great Lakes plate is likely to carry more of it. 20. A town warned not to touch its own lake. Oscoda, Michigan sells itself as trout streams and Lake Huron beaches. Its own residents are now warned not to eat the local fish or deer, and not to touch the foam on the shore. The former Wurtsmith Air Force Base used PFAS-laden firefighting foam for decades, and Michigan first documented the contamination in Oscoda's water back in 2010. In a community science project run with the Ecology Center and the National Wildlife Federation, residents scooped bright white foam from 4 Lake Huron sites between 2022 and 2023, and every sample came back positive, with foam at Tawas Point State Park hitting 7,900 parts per trillion of total PFAS. Foam can concentrate PFAS to as much as 5,000 times the level in the water around it, and that reading is nearly 2,000 times the EPA's 4 parts per trillion drinking water standard. State officials have warned people off 4 things at once in and around Clark's Marsh and parts of the Au River. Don't eat the fish, don't eat the deer, don't eat the small game, and avoid contact with the surface water and shoreline foam. 16 years after the discovery, treatment systems cover only part of the plume, and a full cleanup is still years away. The PFAS keeps migrating from Wurtsmith into the marsh, the river, and ultimately Lake Huron. So the families here still live beside a shoreline where touching the foam or eating the catch adds to a lifelong chemical body burden. And those warnings are still posted up and down the beach today. We're 6 deep. Quick one while you're here. Which of those 6 unsettled you most? Tell me in the comments. I do read them. And if you'd rather know than not, hit subscribe and drop a like. Right, back to it. Next, 100 miles of river where the state tells you not to eat anything you catch. 19. 100 river miles stamped "Do Not Eat." On August 4, 2018, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services issued an emergency "Do Not Eat Fish" advisory for stretches of the Huron River after testing found high levels of PFOS, a PFAS forever chemical, in fish from Kent Lake, Baseline Lake, and Argo Pond. Within a month, on August 31st, the state extended it the entire length of the river. No fish, from North Wixom Road in Oakland County all the way down to the river's mouth at Lake Erie in Wayne County. 5 counties, roughly 100 river miles of a beloved kayaking and fishing corridor that runs through Ann Arbor. Investigators traced the PFOS to a manufacturer in Wixom, later identified as Tri-Bar Manufacturing, whose discharges reach the river through the local wastewater plant. And because Michigan only slaps on a "Do Not Eat" designation when levels are severe, its threshold at the time was 300 parts per billion of PFOS in fish. The 2018 advisory quietly revealed something worse than the ban itself. People had already been catching and eating those fish for years before anyone told them to stop. PFOS breaks down extraordinarily slowly, so even with Tri-Bar's discharges now under a state consent order, contaminated sediment and resident fish keep the food web loaded with it. Much of the Upper Huron remains under a blanket "Do Not Eat" advisory today, with only species-by-species relaxations downstream, and the same "monitored while people kept eating it" lag is exactly what regulators now fear is playing out on other Great Lakes tributaries right now. 18. A live ordnance zone on the lakebed. Leave Port Clinton, Ohio, and the water off Camp Perry looks like ordinary open lake. In federal records, it's a formerly used defense site and a legally designated danger zone under 33 CFR 334.850. For decades, the Army fired artillery from the former Erie Army Depot straight into western Lake Erie, and the rounds never came back out. An Army Waterways Experiment Station survey in September 1993 cataloged 5,438 ordnance and explosive waste items between the waterline and 500 feet inland. Roughly 1 in 5 of them still potentially live. In a 2006 lake bottom survey, divers sent down to check 36 targets on the reefs off the depot came back up with intact 155mm, 105mm, 90mm, and 75mm projectiles and a 4.2-inch mortar. Between 1992 and 2011, contractors hauled more than 13,000 pieces of unexploded ordnance out of the site, and Great Lakes Now reports that live shells have consistently appeared on the beaches by Camp Perry. Part of the lake still closes to the public whenever the range is hot, and national figures count at least 24 people killed and 22 seriously injured by unexploded ordnance in the US since 1965. Some of them, people who simply netted or handled around. So the standing public guidance stays blunt. Recognize, retreat, report. This isn't a closed chapter. Storms, ice, and dredging keep the shells drifting through the same shallows where charter boats and anglers work every season, which is why the Army Corps has scheduled itself to keep clearing this shoreline every 3 years until 2057.
17. The reactor that already melted down.
On October 5, 1966, the Fermi 1 fast breeder reactor on Lake Erie's western shore, south of Detroit, suffered a partial fuel meltdown. The cause was almost absurd. Zirconium plates that engineers had bolted in as a safety feature, meant to spread molten fuel in a worst case, broke loose, lodged under the core, and choked off the liquid sodium coolant to 2 fuel assemblies. Sodium temperatures on 2 of the 92 fuel assemblies ran far above the expected range, and both assemblies partially melted. Containment held, no radiation reached the public, and one technical analysis notes the safety system worked in containing 10,000 curies of fission products activity released into the Na coolant. Nuclear safety engineer David Lochbaum has pointed out the bitter irony. The hardware added to prevent a meltdown is exactly what triggered one, a short walk from a lake that supplies drinking water to millions. And here's the part that never ended. Federal lab records from Idaho National Laboratory state that 34 metric tons of sodium-bonded blanket material from the decommissioned Fermi 1 reactor were shipped to and are currently stored at the Idaho Nation Lab. Material that's awaiting removal from the state of Idaho by 2035. That's about 75,000 pounds of spent nuclear fuel from one 1966 failure, still stranded, still waiting on a deadline the country hasn't met. A newer reactor, Fermi 2, still runs on that same shoreline today, so the legacy of the accident sits beside the lake, unresolved decade after decade. 16. Tar sands oil that sank and wouldn't leave. On the evening of July 25, 2010, Enbridge's Line 6B ruptured near Marshall, Michigan, releasing at least 843,000 gallons, by some accounts close to 1 million, of diluted bitumen into Talmadge Creek and down roughly 35 miles of the Kalamazoo River. Then it did the thing regulators had assumed heavy crude never would. As the light diluent evaporated off, the bitumen thickened to the consistency of peanut butter, bound to river sediment, and sank to the bottom, collecting in backwaters, behind dams, and in Morrow Lake. EPA Incident Commander Ralph Dahlhoff, who ran the response, later said he never expected the response to spend 2 or 3 times longer on submerged oil than on surface oil. Nobody had planned for crude that behaves like a slow-moving solid underwater. In 2013, the EPA ordered Enbridge back to dredge the most heavily oiled reaches. Yet the CBC reported an agency estimate of at least 180,000 gallons of bitumen still sitting submerged years later. The contaminated stretch drains straight into Lake Michigan. By volume, it stands as one of the largest inland oil spills in United States history. This is the case that rewrote the risk math for every pipeline crossing a Great Lakes tributary. Residual diluted bitumen remains embedded in Kalamazoo River and Morrow Lake sediment to this day, and agency documents acknowledge it stays mobile under floods and major disturbances. Proof that a single inland pipeline failure can seed tar sands oil into the basin in a way that's effectively impossible to fully reverse. 15. The plan to bury nuclear waste beside a Great Lake. For more than a decade, Ontario Power Generation pushed to bury low and intermediate level nuclear waste in a deep geologic repository at the Bruce nuclear site, 680 meters underground and about 1 kilometer inland from Lake Huron, by the International Joint Commission's description. The plan reached the very edge of approval. What stopped it was a single vote. On January 31, 2020, the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation held a referendum, and the tally, in Windspeaker's account, saw 1,058 voting against the ballot question. In favor were 170 members, with 4 ballots spoiled, about 85% no. Chief Lester Aniquat called it a momentous victory for our people, and in May 2020, after some 15 years of environmental assessment, OPG withdrew its application. But a referendum only blocked one dump. The waste that was already there hasn't moved. It still sits in interim storage on the Lake Huron shore, some of it accumulating there since the 1970s. And the question didn't close, it relocated. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization spent years studying 1,500 acres it had bought near Teeswater, in the same Saugeen territory, as one of 2 finalist sites for the country's high-level used fuel. In November 2024, it chose the other one, the Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation and Ignis area, some 250 kilometers northwest of Thunder Bay. So the deep burial plan moved away from Lake Huron. The waste didn't. Low and intermediate level material still sits in interim storage on that shoreline with no permanent home, and used fuel keeps accumulating there from reactors that never shut down, a decision this generation is handing, unresolved, to the next. 14. The lake that filtered itself into collapse. Invasive zebra and quagga mussels were supposed to be a nuisance. Instead, they rewired the Great Lakes. NOAA's Thunder Bay Condition Report documents offshore Lake Michigan clarity climbing from a Seiche depth of 19.7 feet in the late 1980s to 59 feet by 2007 to 2010, with basin-wide water clarity up 38.5%. Michigan Tech senior research scientist Gary Fahnenstiel puts the mechanism in one line. It's estimated in Lake Michigan right now, the mussels can filter the entire volume of water in 6 days. An estimated 10 trillion mussels now carpet the lakes, and the National Wildlife Federation credits them with doubling water clarity over the past decade. What remote sensing scientist Robert Schuckman of the Michigan Tech Research Institute calls the dominant filtering mechanism for water quality. But that clean, gin-clear look is the symptom of collapse, not health. The mussels strip out the plankton at the very base of the food web, starving native fish, while the leftover nutrients and the sunlight now reaching the bottom feed thick mats of Cladophora algae. When those mats rot, they help drive the type E botulism that kills water birds by the tens of thousands. And there's no habitat left to hide in. Quagga mussels colonize sand and soft mud down to 130 meters, and limnologist Dr. Harvey Bootsma puts the result plainly. Instead of a thin ribbon around the lake, most of the bottom of Lake Michigan is covered with quagga mussels now. They're now functionally permanent, continually stripping plankton and rerouting the lake's energy into toxic, low-oxygen carpets on the lake bed. So the food web keeps unraveling behind water that only looks pristine, and scientists expect that quiet re-engineering to deepen every year rather than reverse. 13. When clear water becomes a bird kill zone. Every few years, the shorelines of eastern Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, around Long Point and the eastern basin shorelines of Jefferson County, New York, fill with paralyzed loons, mergansers, grebes, and gulls, their necks limp and wings useless, dead or dying of type E botulism. Since invasive zebra and quagga mussels spread through the lakes, these outbreaks have killed at least 80,000 birds, more than 50,000 of them on Lakes Erie and Ontario alone since 1999. New York State wildlife pathologists cutting open the dead kept turning up the same thing: round goby remains in the digestive tracts, an invasive fish that gorges on mussel beds. The mussels filter enormous volumes of water and concentrate Clostridium botulinum from decaying Cladophora algae mats. When those mats rot, they strip oxygen from the bottom, creating the warm, low-oxygen pockets where the bacteria thrive and manufacture neurotoxin. Live, healthy-looking fish then carry that toxin straight up into the birds that eat them, meaning a loon can die from a single normal meal taken in water that still looks perfectly clean. That's the trap. The die-offs happen behind glass-clear, inviting water, not visibly polluted water, and the ecological machinery behind it has become permanent furniture in the lakes. The mussels are entrenched, round gobies are a dominant bottom fish, and warmer water only favors more toxin. So the pathway from bacteria to mussel to goby to bird stays loaded, and biologists expect these mass wildlife deaths to keep recurring, unpredictably, and mostly in late summer and fall, rather than fade away. 12. A fish virus the lakes can't flush out. In 2005, Big kills of freshwater drum and muskellunge in Lake Ontario's Bay of Quinte and in Lake St. Clair marked the first outbreaks of viral hemorrhagic septicemia, strain VHSV4B, in Great Lakes fish. It's a brutal pathogen, causing internal bleeding and organ failure. Then came the unsettling detail. Archived muskellunge collected back in 2003 later tested positive, proving the virus had already been circulating, unseen, before the die-offs even began. Within roughly 6 years, it had spread through all 5 Great Lakes and into inland waters, despite fish movement controls. Agencies have now documented VHS in at least 18 Great Lakes fish species: walleye, yellow perch, whitefish, drum, round goby, and muskellunge among them, part of more than 50 species affected across the northern hemisphere. And it didn't burn out. It went quiet in the worst possible way. Later surveillance found infected fish showing no outward signs at all, confirming the virus had shifted from spectacular kills into a chronic, embedded presence in the food web. Management agencies gave up on wiping it out. They treat VHSV4B as endemic now, imposing bait fish and live fish transport and certification rules indefinitely just to slow it down. That's the disturbing status quo. A fish that looks perfectly healthy can carry it into new water on any boat or bait bucket, and a sharp temperature swing in the cold water of spring or fall, the narrow window where VHS kills hardest, can trigger the next mass die-off no one saw coming.
11. One electric fence between the carp and the lakes.
Between the Mississippi Basin, where invasive bighead and silver carp have taken over, and Lake Michigan stands essentially one line of defense. A set of electric barriers in the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal near Romeoville, Illinois, about 37 miles from the lake. The Army Corps' own engineering study is blunt about the stakes. The canal is the only direct connection between the two basins, an artificial channel dug to reverse Chicago's river that accidentally welded 2 watersheds together. Steel electrodes on the canal floor create a pulsed field about 160 feet wide and 20 to 25 feet deep, tuned to repel adult carp while letting barges and towboats pass. But it has a gap. Juveniles under about 5 inches may not be stopped at all, and the Corps' own testing warns that passing barges can entrain small fish and pull them straight through the field, and carp DNA has already been detected above the barrier. USGS biologist Dwayne Chapman warns that if the fish reach Lake Michigan, they could strip out the plankton that native fish and mussels depend on, threatening a fishery worth billions. Managers accept the barrier is a single point of failure, which is why they're now building the roughly $1.15 billion Brandon Road Interbasin project downstream, layering an electric field with bubble curtains and underwater sound. Until it's finished, the carp stay entrenched in the Illinois River. The barrier has to run flawlessly and continuously, and the Great Lakes remain one sustained power failure or one unlucky bypass away from an invasion that, once established, would be nearly impossible to reverse. We're into the final 10 now, and this is where the separate horrors start to rhyme. The same clear water, the same aging shoreline, the same handful of choke points where one failure reaches millions of people at once. Stay with me. The closer we get to number 1, the more personal it becomes. 10. Wrecks that still kill the experts. The Great Lakes are sold as an underwater museum, curated ghost ship dives on famous, heavily visited wrecks. The record says something colder. Well-equipped modern divers keep dying on the very sites the brochures advertise. On July 13, 2013, Lloyd W. Crone, 55, of Wyoming, Minnesota, was fatally injured diving the Kamloops at Isle Royale National Park in Lake Superior on a guided charter of 3, and the site was temporarily closed to diving afterward. In September 2024, 72-year-old Patrick Kelly of Winthrop Harbor, Illinois, died at depth on the wreck of the Wisconsin in Lake Michigan after diving alone to retrieve a severed line left snagged on the wreck as a hazard to other divers. And the county search boat sent out for him took on water 4 miles from shore and sank to the bottom. Its 8 crew pulled off by other vessels. That same year, another diver died on a shipwreck dive at Isle Royale, prompting a National Park Service investigation. Even formal training fails here. A September 2017 fatality near the Madeira wreck by Split Rock Lighthouse in Lake Superior killed 42-year-old Aaron Timmerman, who surfaced calling for help. went under before anyone could reach him, and was carried up off the bottom by 2 members of his own group. These sites share one lethal profile: deep, near freezing, silt-choked, dark water in a lake nicknamed for how it never gives up her dead, where a small error becomes fatal fast through cold, entanglement, or a sudden loss of visibility. And the danger extended even to the rescuers in 2024, when the recovery boat went down too. Great Lakes wreck tourism is growing, not shrinking, so the exact conditions that killed Crone, Kelly, and Timmerman remain fully in place, still waiting on the same popular wrecks today. 9. The anchor that nearly ruptured everything. On April 1st, 2018, a tug and barge crossing the Straits of Mackinac, where Lakes Michigan and Huron meet, let a roughly 6-ton, 12,000-pound anchor pay out and drag along the lakebed. The crew didn't realize it until roughly 30 hours later, as they approached Indiana Harbor. In those hours, the anchor struck Enbridge's twin Line 5 oil pipelines, denting and gouging steel first laid in 1953, and sliced through 3 of American Transmission Company's 6 submarine power cables, spilling about 800 gallons of dielectric oil and causing roughly $100 million in cable damage. Line 5 has carried oil and natural gas liquids beneath the straits since the early 1950s, a twin pipeline now more than 7 decades old. Here's the genuinely disturbing part. Straight from the U.S. Coast Guard's report of investigation, Enbridge received a signal on their pipeline threat detection system that monitors the dual pipelines right at the moment of impact. But the company didn't recognize it as an anchor strike and didn't shut the line down for days. The pipelines remained structurally sound and intact, and no oil escaped Line 5 itself. The spill came from the power cables. In other words, it wasn't detection that saved the straits. It was pure luck that the anchor dented the line instead of tearing it open at the single worst spill site between 2 Great Lakes. Oil still moves through that same aging corridor, with ship traffic passing overhead every day, which means one more dragged anchor could rupture a line and spread crude into 2 lakes before responders even locate the break. 8. A city with a working door in the water wall. The 2008 Great Lakes Compact was supposed to be a wall. No new diversions of Great Lakes water to communities outside the basin. In 2016, that wall got a working door. Waukesha, Wisconsin, a Milwaukee suburb sitting just outside the basin, in what the compact calls a straddling county, with radium, a carcinogen, contaminating its deep groundwater, applied to pipe in Lake Michigan water. On June 21, 2016, the Compact Council found in its final decision that the diversion amount that is consistent with the compact is 8.2 million gallons per day. And Circle of Blue reported that 8 Great Lakes governors voted unanimously to approve a diversion of Lake Michigan water to the city of Waukesha, calling it the first exception to the 2008 Great Lakes Compact. The council attached strict conditions and required Waukesha to send back treated wastewater equal to what it takes, about 100% of the volume, and Lake Michigan water finally began flowing to roughly 70,000 residents in October 2023 through a $286 million project. Waukesha's own case was genuinely strong. Its groundwater really is unsafe, but the precedent is the disturbing part. The compact's flat never divert quietly became sometimes with conditions, and environmental groups warned it hands every future out-of-basin community a template to invoke. As aquifers decline and droughts intensify across the continent, that door doesn't close behind Waukesha. Every future applicant can still point straight at it, and each new diversion chips a little more certainty off the one wall protecting the largest fresh surface water on the planet. 7. A 10-foot wave with no earthquake. On June 26, 1954, a wall of water the New York Times called a huge lake wave struck the Chicago lakefront, sweeping people off the piers along North Avenue and Montrose Harbor and drowning them. 4 confirmed dead in that first report, with others missing. For decades, the city filed it under folklore as a freak Seiche. Scientists now know exactly what it was: a Meteor tsunami, a tsunami-like surge driven not by an earthquake, but by a fast-moving squall line and a sudden jump in air pressure that shoves a bulge of water ahead of the storm. Roughly 10 feet of water, arriving on what looked like an ordinary summer afternoon, and it was never a one-off. Research led by scientist Adam Beckley estimates that meteor tsunamis strike the Great Lakes on the order of 100 times every single year, most too small to notice, but some several feet high and fully capable of sweeping a person off a break wall in seconds. The disturbing part is the blind spot. An experimental buoy went into Lake Michigan in 2021, and NOAA's Great Lakes Lab only took it over in 2024, a single instrument, recording what had never been officially observed in real time before, which means that until now, they've arrived with essentially no dedicated warning at all. Because the trigger is in the sky, not the seabed, a meteor tsunami can rise on a day with no sirens, no tremor, and nothing worse on the forecast than a passing storm. Those squall lines keep rolling across the lakes every warm season. The detection network is still only half built, and every crowded pier remains exposed to a surge nobody sees coming. 6. A snow band that buries one town, spares the next. Lake-effect snow off the Great Lakes doesn't fall evenly. It falls in a knife-edged band that can bury one neighborhood, while the next one over stays almost clear. On November 17th to 19th, 2014, the National Weather Service in Buffalo recorded more than 5 feet of snow just east of the city, while areas a few miles north got, in their words, mere inches. With a storm maximum of 65 inches at South Cheektowaga, the band was only 15 to 20 miles wide and parked over the south towns for hours, behaving less like a moving storm than a stalled wall of snow. A Great Lakes Climate Bulletin logged up to 88 inches, more than 7 feet, across parts of the Buffalo area through November 21st, ranking it among the largest lake effect events on record. The Weather Service attributes 13 deaths to the storm, along with hundreds of roof collapses and thousands of motorists stranded on impassable roads, including Interstate 90. The concealment was the line itself. South Cheektowaga measured 65 inches, while northern Buffalo saw only inches, so a single metro area held a buried disaster zone and dry pavement at the same time. And this is the opposite of a freak event. New York's own climate assessment treats the storm as a case study in lethal, sharply bounded lake-effect snow. As Lake Erie holds its warmth later into winter, cold air outbreaks can regenerate the very same bands over the very same streets, leaving those neighborhoods exposed to sudden multi-foot snow loads and deadly travel shutdowns every winter to come.
5. When calm water turns lethal in minutes.
The Great Lakes are so big that wind whips up ocean-grade rip and structural currents in what people still shrug off as just a lake. The National Weather Service's Great Lakes Current Incident Database, a 19-year archive kept by NWS Northern Indiana, documents 703 current-related incidents and 223 fatalities from 2002 to 2020, with 448 of those incidents on Lake Michigan alone, which the NWS has dubbed the deadliest Great Lake. The Great Lakes Surf Rescue Project's own running count now stands at 1,452 Great Lakes drownings since 2010. Its co-founder, Dave Benjamin, who nearly drowned in Lake Michigan himself, warns that people underestimate the lakes because they think it's just a little lake, but really, it's more of an inland sea. The National Weather Service notes Great Lakes waves come onto shore every 3 to 5 seconds on average, much faster than ocean waves, knocking swimmers off their feet before they can recover. The NWS reports an average of 12 fatalities and 23 rescues from dangerous currents each summer, and rip currents are blamed for the majority of Great Lakes surf deaths, most of them on warm, sunny days when the water looks its most inviting and lifeguards aren't there. Structural currents run along piers and breakwalls, the very landmarks families treat as safe, and have swept tracking drifters more than 1,000 feet offshore. These currents form from wind, waves, and the shape of the beach, not from any one storm, so the hazard reforms with every warm season and shifts as the sand moves. And with most Great Lakes beaches unguarded, the lakes keep producing scores of preventable, largely invisible drownings every summer, with young men and would-be rescuers making up most of the dead. 4. A dead zone shoved into the drinking water intakes. Every summer, the central basin of Lake Erie grows a cold, oxygen-starved dead zone on its floor. NOAA describes the setup plainly. In the summer, the lake stratifies, with warm water on the top and cold, dense, deep water below. Oxygen in this deep water is used up, resulting in low oxygen, or hypoxia. Then, the wind turns that layer into a weapon. Strong wind events in the summer can cause upwelling, which brings this cold, hypoxic bottom water up to the surface close to shore. And, as the International Joint Commission adds, it can carry that water to the water intake pipes located near cities. What arrives is chemically hostile, hypoxic water rich in dissolved manganese and low in pH, which can discolor treated water and corrode the pipes that carry it, leaching out lead and copper. And the exposure is enormous. NOAA notes the Central Basin provides drinking water to more than 2 million people along the Ohio coast. That's why NOAA runs an operational Lake Erie hypoxia forecast, so treatment plant operators can scramble to adjust their chemistry the moment a dead zone upwelling reaches their intake cribs. Unlike a one-time spill, this hazard resets itself. The hypoxic layer rebuilds every summer and shifts with the weather, its size and position never fixed. So millions of people stay dependent on buoys and forecasts to catch, in time, an invisible slug of corrosive water headed straight for the pumps that fill their taps. 3. 500,000 people told not to drink the water. In late July and early August of 2014, a toxic algal bloom fed by farm runoff spread across western Lake Erie, right over the intake for Toledo, Ohio's water system. On August 1st, the city's Collins Park treatment plant flagged elevated microcystin, a liver toxin, and testing found it at 3.19 micrograms per liter in treated water, more than 3 times Ohio EPA's advisory threshold of 1 microgram per liter. On the morning of August 2nd, in the words of EPA testimony, Toledo Mayor Collins issued a do not drink or boil advisory, as recommended by Ohio EPA, to the nearly 500,000 customers served by the water system, triggering a state of emergency and the mobilization of the Ohio National Guard to truck in emergency water. It left, by one account, some 400,000 people across northwestern Ohio and southeastern Michigan without safe tap water for 2 days, until Mayor D. Michael Collins announced on August 4th that it was finally safe again. And boiling the water, the instinct in any crisis, only made it more dangerous because heat concentrates the toxin. The blooms that caused it haven't gone anywhere. They return to warm, shallow western Lake Erie most summers, fed by the same phosphorus loads pouring off the same farmland. So the drinking water for millions of people around that basin sits, every single summer, just one warm, wind-driven bloom away from the next morning nobody can pour a glass from the tap. 2. Standing waves that flood a coast with no tide. Everyone knows the Great Lakes have no tides, which is exactly why the cities on their shores were never built for what a Seiche can do. Lake Erie, the shallowest of the 5, sloshes shore to shore like water tipped in a bathtub. Winds from the west-southwest shove the whole lake from Toledo toward Buffalo, dropping the level in the west and piling it up in the east. And when the wind eases, it rocks back for hours, even days. In late 2025, 2 Seiches recorded on Great Lakes Observing System buoys drove water 6 feet above normal at the mouth of the Buffalo River and 5 feet above normal at Sturgeon Point down the shore on November 26th and again on December 1st, flooding the waterfront with no astronomical tide behind it, just hours of hard wind over the length of the lake. The Buffalo Niagara waterkeeper notes that all 8 of the area's historic flood crests, as logged by the National Weather Service, have come since 1975, and 5 of them since 2000, on a lake whose average level researchers project could rise another 11 to 21 inches by 2050. And the same rapid water danger runs basin-wide. These are shorelines and storm sewers engineers built for average levels, not for still water swings of several feet in a single afternoon. So as storms grow more intense over the Great Lakes, Seiche-driven flooding is set to keep swamping sewers and low-lying neighborhoods that never planned for the water to climb this fast. Every big blow to come. 1. Lakes that hold every mistake for generations. Here's what makes every fact in this countdown permanent. The EPA defines a lake's retention time as how long it takes for the entire volume of water to be replaced at its outflow, a direct measure of how long a pollutant can linger. By that measure, the Great Lakes barely flush at all. Lake Superior, holding about 2,900 cubic miles of water, has a retention time of roughly 191 years. roughly 7 or 8 human generations. Water entering it today will still be in the lake when the country marks its 400th birthday in 2176. Lake Michigan runs about 99 years, Huron about 22, Ontario about 6, and even fast-flushing Lake Erie about 2.6. Yet Erie is fed by the far slower lakes above it. Now put the whole countdown back into that water, the live shells and the lead, the tar sands bitumen and the sunken microplastics, the PFAS in the foam a town can't touch, the microcystin that shut off Toledo's taps, the forever chemicals packed into a single fish dinner. None of them break down quickly, and this slow-flushing vault is the reservoir they enter. So every hazard here isn't an event that passes. It's a deposit into an account that won't release its holdings for a lifetime, or 2, or 8 generations. The lakes look endlessly self-cleaning. They're the opposite. They remember, they recirculate, and they hand the full balance, today's inputs and a century of legacy together, to people who won't be born for 100 years. That's the deeply disturbing thing the Great Lakes are still hiding. They forget nothing, and the bill comes due long after we're gone. That's the countdown. Every hazard here lands in water that barely flushes for a lifetime. So nothing you just heard is really over. It's still in there, and it's still building. Tell me which one unsettled you most, and subscribe before the next one.